My name is Gladys. I'm 28, and I thought I knew what a monster looked like until I saw one holding a hair clipper over my 6-year-old daughter. My brother Justin didn't just shave my daughter Hope's head in front of the whole family. He laughed and called her a bad child. The sound of the clippers was louder than her crying. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "She needs to learn how to obey. This is the best way to stop her being so stubborn." I looked at my parents for help, but my mother just crossed her arms coldly. At least she's less of a nuisance now. My father didn't even flinch, his voice dripping with contempt. She was never the grandchild we wanted anyway. In that suffocating living room in Albuquerque, I watched my daughter's spirit break along with her hair hitting the floor. I realized right then, I had become an enemy to my own family's toxicity, but they had no idea what was coming next. She lost everything in one fateful afternoon, but they had no idea that at that very moment she began to become the most dangerous person to them. Please subscribe to our channel right now and let me know in the comments where you are supporting us from to witness this shocking rise together. I didn't wait for the dust to settle in that suffocating living room before I grabbed a tattered duffel bag and began throwing in whatever essentials I could find. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped a stack of Hope's clothes twice, but no one in my family moved a finger to help. They just watched with that same cold, judgmental silence. I reached for my wallet, intending to take the debit card for our shared emergency account, but my mother's voice stopped me cold. "Don't even bother, Gladys," she said, her eyes fixed on the television as if my departure were a minor commercial break. "We already called the bank. That account is frozen. You want to be independent, fine. Start from zero." I felt the blood drain from my face. That account held the $3,000 I had painstakingly saved from my side jobs over the last year, money they now claimed as theirs simply because their names were on the paperwork. I didn't argue. I knew that looking for fairness in this house was like looking for water in the middle of the desert. I gripped Hope's hand, her small fingers twitching against my palm, and walked out the front door without looking back. The night air in Albuquerque didn't offer the relief I expected. It was heavy and sweltering, the kind of dry heat that clings to your skin like a second layer of clothing. We walked for nearly 2 miles, the wheels of my broken suitcase clicking rhythmically against the cracked pavement. Every time a car drove past, Hope flinched, pulling the oversized wool scarf she had used to wrap her head tighter around her face. It was nearly 85 degrees out, and she looked like a feverish patient, but I knew she would rather suffocate than let the world see what Justin had done to her. By 11 o'clock, we reached a small neon-lit motel near the edge of Route 66. The sign flickered with a buzzing sound that grated on my nerves. Inside the cramped office, a man with a stained shirt looked at us through a smeary glass partition. I placed my last $40 in cash on the counter, praying it would be enough for a single night. He looked at me then, at Hope, who was shivering despite the heat, her muffled sobs echoing in the small space. "Is the kid sick?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "I don't need no trouble here. No fevers, no coughing, no social services knocking on my door because a brat won't shut up. Move along." I tried to plead, explaining that she was just upset, but he simply pushed my money back and pointed at the door. We were rejected 4 more times after that. Each time the reason was different, but the result was the same. They didn't want the nuisance of a broken child. Eventually, we ended up sitting on a concrete curb under a flickering yellow streetlight. The silence of the industrial district was broken only by the distant hum of the highway. A group of teenagers loitered near a convenience store across the street, laughing and tossing a football. As we stood up to continue our aimless walk, one of them noticed us. "Hey, check out the freak," he shouted, pointing a finger at Hope. "Why you wearing a rug on your head, kid? It Halloween already." They began to hoot and whistle. One boy ran closer, mocking the way Hope shuffled her feet. Before I could shield her, a gust of wind caught the loose end of her scarf, tugging it away just enough to reveal the jagged, uneven patches of scalp where Justin's clipper had bitten too deep. The laughter intensified. "Look at that. She's got the mange." Hope let out a sound I will never forget, a high, thin wail of pure shame, and collapsed onto the sidewalk, trying to bury her face in the dirt. I knelt beside her, pulling her into my lap, my heart feeling like it was being shredded by dull blades. I looked back at the house we had left then, at the cruel faces across the street, and felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. The sadness didn't disappear, but it was reinforced by a foundation of iron. I whispered into her ear, my voice low and steady. "I promise you, Hope. I am going to make sure they never have the chance to do this to any child ever again. Not just to you, but to anyone." Desperation has a way of filtering your memories, forcing you to look for anchors in a sea of chaos. As I sat on that grimy motel bed watching Hope finally drift into a restless sleep, my mind drifted back to the quiet Sunday dinners at my parents' house. I remembered Grandpa Pearl, a retired veteran with eyes that saw through every lie, sitting in his worn leather armchair. While my parents doted on Justin, laughing at his arrogance and calling it leadership potential, Grandpa would simply watch. He would catch my eye and slowly shake his head, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing in Justin's narcissism and my parents' complicity. He was a man of few words, but those words carried the weight of iron. 3 days after we were cast out, a cryptic message appeared on my old burner phone. It was from Grandpa Pearl asking me to meet him at the Santa Fe National Cemetery. I arrived early, the rows of white marble headstones shimmering under the relentless New Mexico sun. I found him standing tall near the memorial for his fallen comrades, his hands resting on a polished wooden cane. He didn't offer a hug or a tearful apology for what his son and daughter-in-law had done. Instead, he looked at Hope, who was still hiding under her scarf, and sighed a heavy, weary sound. "Gladys," he began, his voice raspy but firm. "I've watched them turn Justin into a monster for 20 years. I tried to prune that weed, but your father kept watering it. Now the thorns have drawn blood. I expected him to pull out a thick envelope of cash to solve our immediate problems, but his hand stayed on his cane. He knew my parents. He knew that if he gave me a large sum of money now, they would use their legal connections to claim I stole it, or find some way to garnish it as unpaid rent. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tarnished brass key attached to a heavy medallion. He pressed it into my palm, his grip surprisingly strong. "This belongs to a private safety deposit box at the First National Bank. Inside you will find documents, real records of Justin's past that your father thought he had buried deep enough to rot. There are police reports from his college days and statements from people he broke before he ever touched Hope." I looked at the key, confused. "Grandpa, I need a place to live. I need to protect her now." He leaned in, his gaze piercing. "Listen to me, girl. Rage is a fire that burns out fast, leaving only ash. Don't fight them with your anger. It's what they expect. Justin doesn't care about money, not really. He cares about how the world sees him. He worships his reputation like a god. If you hit him there, he will crumble. Don't hit his face. Hit his pride. That is the only way to ensure he never stands tall enough to hurt anyone again." He gave me one more thing, the business card of a man named Mr. Henderson. "He was my battalion lawyer, and he's the only man in this state who can't be bought by your father's country club friends. Call him when you are ready to build a case, not just a grudge." With the brass key burning a hole in my pocket, I felt a shift in my soul. I wasn't just a victim running away anymore. I was a soldier gathering intelligence. The next morning, I secured a job as a housekeeper at the Sanderson Hotel, one of the most prestigious establishments in downtown Albuquerque. It was grueling, back-breaking work, scrubbing marble floors and changing heavy linens until my fingernails bled. But it gave me two things: a steady paycheck that my parents couldn't touch, and a vantage point. Every evening after my shift, while Hope worked on her drawings in the hotel's employee childcare corner, I pored over the documents from the safety deposit box. Mr. Henderson met me in secret, his face darkening as he reviewed the files. "Your grandfather was right to keep these," he whispered. "This isn't just family drama, Gladys. This is a pattern of criminal endangerment." I realized then that my silence hadn't been peace. It had been an invitation for them to hurt us. That invitation was now officially revoked. The fluorescent lights of the hotel basement flickered as I scrubbed the grease off the industrial trays, but my mind was miles away navigating the digital minefield Justin had created. While I was rebuilding my life from the dirt up, my brother was busy constructing a monument to his own perfection. One evening, after tucking Hope into bed in our tiny rented room, I made the mistake of checking social media. There it was, a video titled, "Family First, Tough Love for a Better Future." Justin had edited the footage of that horrific afternoon, cutting out the screams and the cold stares of my parents. He presented himself as a concerned patient uncle, dealing with a troubled child, claiming he was merely correcting her behavior to save her from a life of rebellion. The comments were filled with praise for his strength and discipline. His narcissism was a poison that turned the truth inside out. But I remembered Grandpa Pearl's advice hit his pride, not his face. Justin's ego was so massive that he didn't realize he had left a trail of broken people in his wake during his rapid ascent at Soltech. Mr. Henderson had pointed me toward a name in the safety deposit box record: Sarah Miller, no relation to us but a woman who had once been Justin's senior project lead. I found her working at a small hardware store on the edge of town, her face hardening the moment I mentioned my brother's name. "He didn't just push me out," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped a wrench. "He stole my research, claimed my patents as his own, and when I tried to report him, he used your father's influence to threaten my family. But Justin has one fatal flaw: he likes to record his victories." She reached into her locker and pulled out an old encrypted thumb drive. "He sent me the full unedited video of what he did to your daughter. He thought it would intimidate me, showing me what happens to disobedient people in his world. He didn't think I'd have the courage to keep it." I felt a surge of cold triumph as I watched the unedited footage with Mr. Henderson later that night. It was all there: the raw cruelty, the malicious laughter, and the way my parents sat by like statues. This was the weapon Grandpa Pearl had promised. But we weren't ready to fire it yet. We needed Justin to feel the walls closing in. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere at Soltech began to shift. Justin, who usually strode through the hallways like a king, started looking over his shoulder. I had Mr. Henderson send a series of anonymous inquiries to the company's ethics board, asking about past litigation and non-disclosure agreements involving Justin. We didn't reveal the video, just enough information to make the board members start asking uncomfortable questions. Justin's social media posts became increasingly erratic. He stopped posting about tough love and started rallying against shadowy enemies and jealous failures who were trying to tarnish his legacy. My sources at the hotel, who often served the Soltech executives during lunch meetings, reported that Justin was seen frantically deleting files from his work computer and arguing with his secretary. He was losing the one thing he valued most: the illusion of control. One night, my phone buzzed with a restricted call. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was unmistakable. It was Justin, his voice a mixture of rage and genuine fear. "I know it's you, Gladys. You think you're smart? You think anyone will believe a dishwasher over a top executive? I'll have you blacklisted from every job in New Mexico. I'll make sure you and that brat are sleeping on the street for real this time. Stop this now, or I will end you." I listened to the recording twice, my face devoid of emotion. I didn't feel scared. I felt a grim satisfaction. He was flailing, lashing out because he knew his carefully curated world was built on sand. He thought he was the hunter, but he was slowly realizing he was the one being tracked. I looked at Hope, who was finally sleeping without her scarf. her hair beginning to grow back in tiny, soft patches. She was the reason I was doing this, but the justice I was seeking was no longer just about her. It was about dismantling the machinery of cruelty that my family had operated for decades. Justin was terrified of the dark, but he had no idea that I was the one holding the light, and I was about to turn it on. The threat Justin left on my voicemail didn't keep me awake. Instead, it acted like a shot of adrenaline, fueling my resolve as the day of his grand inauguration at Soltech finally arrived. The grand ballroom of the Hilton, where Soltech was hosting their annual executive gala, was a sea of expensive suits, sparkling champagne, and forced smiles. I stood in the shadows of the service corridor wearing my stiff, starched hotel uniform. In my pocket, I felt the cool plastic of a remote bypass device that Mr. Henderson's technical contact had prepared. Today, Justin wasn't just receiving a promotion. He was stepping onto a stage I had carefully rigged for his downfall. The lights dimmed, and a thunderous round of applause erupted as Justin took the stage. He looked radiant under the spotlights, his hair perfectly coiffed, radiating an aura of untouchable success that he had spent years cultivating through lies and intimidation. He adjusted the microphone, his smile widening as he looked out at the board of directors. Success isn't just about innovation. He began, his voice booming with a practiced, hollow confidence. It's about discipline. It's about making the hard choices that others are too weak to make. At Soltech, we don't just build energy solutions. We build a legacy of strength. As he spoke, I caught sight of Mr. Henderson sitting at a table near the back, his expression unreadable. He gave a microscopic nod. It was time. Justin turned toward the massive digital screen behind him, intending to show a flashy montage of his leadership highlights. He clicked his remote, but the screen stayed black for a fraction of a second too long. Then, instead of a corporate slideshow, a grainy, high-definition video flickered to life. The ballroom went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence. It wasn't the edited, tough love version Justin had posted on social media. It was the raw, unedited footage from that afternoon in Albuquerque. The sound system optimized for speeches now projected the shrill, terrifying screams of a 6-year-old girl. On the screen, 3 times larger than life, was Justin. His face was twisted into a mask of malicious joy as he pinned hope down, the electric hum of the hair clippers vibrating through the speakers like a swarm of hornets. The camera caught the cold, detached expressions of my parents in the background, but the focus remained on Justin's laughter as jagged patches of Hope's scalp began to show. Justin's smirk vanished so fast it looked painful. He froze his hand, still holding the remote, clicking it frantically as if he could erase the reality unfolding behind him. "Technical difficulties?" he shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking and jumping an octave. "This is a prank. Someone has hacked the system security. Get this off the screen immediately." He turned to the wings of the stage, screaming for the tech crew, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. But no one moved. The video played until the very end, showing Justin tossing the clippers onto the coffee table and calling his niece a disposable brat, while my mother chuckled. The lights in the ballroom came up, but the atmosphere had shifted from celebration to visceral disgust. The CEO of Soltech, a man known for his ruthless adherence to corporate ethics, stood up from the front table. He didn't look at the screen, he looked directly at Justin. Justin stumbled toward him, his hands shaking. "Sir, please, this is a fabrication. It's a deepfake made by my disgruntled sister. She's a dishwasher. She's unstable." "Enough, Justin." The CEO interrupted, his voice a low, icy blade that cut through Justin's frantic babbling. "We didn't just see that video today. Mr. Henderson delivered a comprehensive file to our ethics committee 48 hours ago, including sworn affidavits from former employees and a police report filed this morning. We were waiting to see if you would have the integrity to step down quietly. You chose to stand on this stage and lie to us instead." Justin gasped, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He tried to call for security again, but two uniformed officers were already walking up the side aisles toward the stage. The CEO gestured toward the exit. Your employment with Soltech is terminated effective immediately. Your access to company accounts and properties is revoked. You will be escorted from the building now. As the officers reached him, Justin's leadership mask finally shattered. He didn't go quietly. He kicked at the podium, screaming curses at the crowd, at me, and at the world that was finally refusing to bow to him. I watched from the shadows as they led him out in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his dignity stripped away, in front of the very people he had sought to impress. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but I knew the battle wasn't over. The house of cards was falling, but my parents were still holding the last few pieces. The thunder of Justin's downfall at Soltech had barely faded before a different kind of silence descended upon my life. The heavy, hollow silence of mourning. Grandpa Pearl passed away just 3 days after the gala, leaving the world as quietly as he had lived in it. While my heart felt like it had been hollowed out by a desert wind, my parents and Justin, who was currently out on bail, seemed to find a sudden frantic energy. They didn't mourn the man. They hovered over his shadow like vultures' eyes fixed on the modest but valuable estate he had kept in his name for decades. They assumed that with his passing, the scales would finally tip back in their favor, and they would find the financial salvation they so desperately needed to cover Justin's mounting legal fees. 2 weeks later, we gathered in the mahogany-paneled office of Mr. Henderson. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and my mother's expensive, cloying perfume, a scent that now felt like a direct insult to the man we were there to remember. My parents sat on one side, Justin leaning back with a forced smirk that didn't quite reach his panicked eyes. They looked at me as if I were a temporary stain on their carpet, convinced that a dishwasher from a local hotel would have no place in a Cuban's legacy. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of professional stoicism, as he unfolded the thick parchment of the last will and testament. Grandpa Pearl was a man of strict principles. Mr. Henderson began, his voice echoing in the small room. He updated his will 6 months ago with a very specific irrevocable contingency clause. He stated that his primary assets, including the family home in Albuquerque and his significant investment portfolio, would be managed under a protective trust. My father let out a sharp, impatient huff. Just get to the numbers, Henderson. We know he intended the house for Justin to start his family. Mr. Henderson ignored him and continued reading with a chilling steadiness. The clause stipulates that the inheritance shall only be activated and transferred to the designated administrator if there is verifiable evidence of physical or emotional endangerment caused by other family members toward the safety and well-being of his great-grandchild Hope. Should such evidence be presented to the executor, the individuals responsible for said endangerment are to be legally and permanently excluded from any and all benefits of this estate. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. Mr. Henderson reached for a heavy manila folder on his desk, the same file I had helped build with the records from the safety deposit box and the unedited footage from the gala. He laid out the photographs of Hope's scalp and the transcripts of Justin's threats. Based on the evidence provided and the subsequent criminal charges filed against Justin Miller, the conditions of the contingency have been met. Justin, along with Douglas and Beverly Miller, are officially disinherited. The entire estate, valued at over $500,000, is placed into a trust for Hope, with Gladys Miller appointed as the sole administrator and legal guardian of the assets. It was as if a bomb had gone off in the room. My mother sprang from her chair, her face contorting into a mask of pure rage. She began to wail, a shrill, piercing sound that had more to do with greed than grief. "This is a setup. You manipulated that senile old man. You stole our house. Gladys, how dare you do this to your own blood? We raised you. We gave you everything, and you repay us by making us homeless." Justin lunged forward, his face turning a dark, bruised purple as he grabbed the edge of the desk. "You evil little witch. You've been planning this since the day you left, haven't you? You use that kid's hair as a ticket to a payday." I stood up slowly, my movements calm and deliberate. I didn't feel the need to scream back. I looked at the three people who had stood by and laughed while my daughter's spirit was being crushed, and I felt nothing but a cold, crystalline pity. Ong Noi Pearl didn't choose me because I'm his favorite. I said, my voice cutting through their noise like a sharp blade. He chose the truth. He spent his whole life watching you turn Justin into a weapon, and he spent his final months making sure that weapon could never draw blood from this family again. He chose what was right. And the right thing is that none of you will ever be allowed to touch her, speak to her, or profit from her pain ever again. My mother collapsed back into her chair, sobbing into her silk scarf, but I didn't move to comfort her. The house they lived in, the one they had threatened to throw me out of so many times now, legally belonged to the little girl they had called a nuisance. As Mr. Henderson signaled for the security to escort them out, I realized that the loneliness they were feeling wasn't just about the money. It was the crushing weight of realizing that their cruelty had finally left them with nothing but each other. The dust of Albuquerque's courts finally settled, leaving behind a world that looked drastically different from the one I had fled 2 years ago. I didn't feel a sudden rush of joy when the final legal documents were stamped. Instead, I felt a profound sense of quietude, the kind that follows a long, grueling storm. My parents and Justin were no longer a towering wall blocking my son. They were merely shadows retreating into the horizon. Justice in the real world isn't always a cinematic explosion. Sometimes it's a slow, methodical dismantling of a house built on cruelty. The consequences for Justin were as absolute as they were deserved. Because of the unedited video and the affidavits from his former victims, he was officially placed on the New Mexico Child Abuse Registry. In the eyes of the law and future employers, he was no longer a brilliant executive. He was a documented predator. His career at Soltech was vin over, and the industry doors across the Southwest slammed shut in his face. Without his high salary to fund his ego, and with his legal fees draining whatever remained of his savings, he became a pariah. My parents, Douglas and Beverly, didn't fare much better. When the sheriff arrived to enforce the eviction notice from Grandpa Pearl's house, they had nowhere to go but a dilapidated mobile home park on the dusty outskirts of town. The high society they had once craved now whispered about them in hushed, judgmental tones. They had each other, but in their world, that was the ultimate punishment. We moved into Grandpa Pearl's house on a crisp autumn morning. I chose to keep the old leather armchair where he used to sit, a reminder of the man who saw the truth when everyone else chose blindness. But the real transformation didn't happen in the deed to the house. It happened in front of the hallway mirror. For 2 years, Hope had avoided her own reflection, treating mirrors like enemies that only reflected her shame. One afternoon, I heard a soft sound coming from the bathroom, not a sob, but a hum. I leaned against the doorframe and watched. Hope was standing on a stool, her hands gently brushing through her hair. It had grown back thick and dark, falling softly past her shoulders in healthy waves. She saw me in the reflection and didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, watching the way the sunlight caught the strands. For the first time since that horrific afternoon in the living room, she smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She wasn't looking at a victim. She was looking at a survivor. The trauma of the hair clippers was still there. She still jumped at the sound of a buzzing motor, but it no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her own image. That evening, I sat on the porch looking out over the vast, shimmering expanse of the New Mexico desert. The sky was a bruised purple, the same color as the mountains in the distance. I felt a deep, silent gratitude toward Grandpa Pearl. He hadn't just given me a house. He had given me the tools to break a generational cycle of silence. He knew that I needed to do more than just run away. I needed to stand my ground and prove that their brand of discipline was nothing more than cowardice. I thought about the lessons I wanted to leave for Hope as she grew up in this new peaceful life. People often say that living well is the best revenge, but I believe it's deeper than that. True revenge is becoming someone your enemies can no longer recognize, someone who is completely untouched by their bitterness. I looked at my daughter, who was now coloring quietly on the rug, her long hair draped over her shoulders like a protective silk veil. I didn't teach her how to hate Justin, and I didn't teach her how to use violence to solve her problems. I taught her that her body and her spirit are hers alone, and that no one, regardless of their title or their bloodline, has the right to diminish her. As I watched the first stars begin to poke through the Albuquerque sky, I whispered a final promise to the memory of the old soldier who saved us. I did not teach my daughter how to seek revenge through anger. I taught her how to never bow to evil, even when it wears the familiar face of family. We didn't just rebuild a life, we built a fortress of dignity that no Miller would ever be able to breach again.